Okay, digestive system is one of the important organ system in our body, which we should know the organs of digestive system, a little bit about their histology and also their function. But you all know that the digestive system job is to digest the food, to break down the food into smaller pieces, into the nutrients. But let me ask you, what we have to eat food? What is the purpose of eating? For energy.
For fuel.
For what?
For fuel.
For fuel, for energy. Okay, how we can use the nutrients for fuel or making energy?
Turn it into like carbohydrates or something.
Turning into the carbohydrate. Actually, the food that we are eating, it should have like the biomolecules or macromolecules. The biomolecules or macromolecules are the molecules which are large and they are complex and only going to be found in living things. In animal cells and in plant cells, we can find the biomolecules or macromolecules, which they are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acid. You can find the protein or carbohydrate in my pen in unliving thing, right? So only we can find these molecules, carbohydrate, lipid, the protein, and a nucleic acid in biomolecules and macromolecules. But because these molecules are so large and complex, we have to break them down into their building blocks. We have to break down the proteins into amino acids. We have to break down the carbohydrate to like the simple sugar like glucose. We have to break down the lipid into the fatty acid and glycerols. And then we have to absorb those digested nutrients like glucose, fatty acid, amino acid into the blood, into the lymph, and then transport them to the cells. Then inside of our cells, do you remember we had some organelles? The organelles, they can use the amino acid to make the proteins like enzyme, hormone, or protein for the membrane, or the mitochondria can use the glucose in the process of cellular respiration to make energy or ATP, and also the smooth endoplasmic reticulum can use the fatty acid for making the new lipids like the steroid hormones. So all of these digested nutrients, our cell can use them. Okay. So we can divide our digestive system into the alimentary canal and the accessory digestive organs. The alimentary canal starts from our mouth and ends at anus. It's a canal or long tube which starts from mouth, and then after mouth or oral cavity, food goes to the pharynx. After pharynx, food goes to the esophagus. After esophagus, food goes into the stomach, and then into the small intestine, and then large intestine, and then it ends at anus. So that is our alimentary canal. So here, make sure you know the organs which gonna make the alimentary canal: mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and large intestine. Also, there are some other organs which they're gonna help with digestive functions. There can be some organs like teeth and tongue, which they can help for mastication or chewing. There can be some glands like the salivary gland, liver, and pancreas, which they can produce and release different type of enzymes and products for digestion of different type of macromolecules. And also gallbladder is another one of the accessory digestive organs, which is gonna store the bile. Okay, so please make sure you know what are the accessory digestive organs. Teeth and tongue in our oral cavity. And then we have some glands, salivary gland, which it can produce the saliva, which inside of saliva, we have the enzyme for breaking down the carbohydrates. Liver, it can produce and release bile, which bile can digest the emulsified fats. And also the bile going to be stored in gallbladder. And then pancreas, which we learned the pancreas in the endocrine system. Most part of the pancreas is an exocrine gland because it can produce the different type of digestive enzyme for breaking down carbohydrate, lipid, nucleic acid, and also the emulsified fats. So here you can see these salivary glands, which they can be found around the oral cavity. And then liver, which is the largest gland in our body, it can be found in the right upper quadrant. And then at the posterior inferior aspect of the liver, you can find the gallbladder. The pancreas, which is the retroperitoneal organ, you can find it deep to the stomach and next to the spine. What are the digestive processes? So we can divide the digestive processes into ingestion, propulsion, digestion, which we can divide it to mechanical digestion and chemical digestion, and then absorption and defecation. Ingestion is just simply taking food into the mouth, which the ingestion gonna happen in our oral cavity. So our upper limb and our oral cavity gonna be involved. Propulsion is pushing food forward. So the propulsion can happen like during swallowing in our pharynx and also in our esophagus. We have some motility, like we have the peristalsis motility, which they can push the food forward. And also in our stomach, small intestine, large intestine, we have this kind of motility because at their wall, there are some smooth muscle, which the contraction of the smooth muscle can make some motility or movement, which this movement can push the food forward from one organ into the another organ. And sometimes this motility can mix the food with the digestive enzyme and can be involved in somehow digestion. So as you can see, the propulsion can happen in our pharynx, esophagus, and all other parts of the alimentary canal. Mechanical digestion is like in our oral cavity, we have mechanical digestion, which with the help of the teeth and tongue, mechanical digestion gonna happen. So it's gonna break down the food into the smaller pieces. And also in our stomach and in our small intestine, because of the motility, with the motility of churning in the stomach and motility of segmentation in the small intestine, they're gonna mix the food with the gastric juice in the stomach, or they're gonna mix the food with the enzyme in our small intestine, and also they're gonna break down the food as well with the segmentation movement, which we're gonna talk about it shortly. Chemical digestion. For chemical digestion, the presence of enzyme is so important. So in chemical digestion, we have to have enzyme. So without enzyme, we cannot digest the nutrients or molecules into their final products. There are different type of enzyme for digestion of different type of macromolecules. For example, we have the amylase enzyme for digestion of carbohydrate. We have the pepsin or peptidase for digestion of protein. We have lipase enzyme for digestion of lipids. Absorption. After breaking down those macromolecules into their final products like amino acid, glucose, the fatty acid, then through the blood and also lymphatic system, we can absorb those nutrients and transport them into the like all parts of our body, then our cell can use them. Defecation is the last process of digestive activity. The indigestible food should be eliminated from our body through the defecation, which is going to happen in our large intestine. Is lactose intolerance due to lack of enzyme? Yes, exactly. Okay. So here you can be familiar with some of the motility which we have in our digestive tract. Peristalsis is the name of motility. So peristalsis, this word, it means contraction. The peristalsis is just a pushing food forward. So for peristalsis, we're going to push food forward from one organ into the another organ, which the peristalsis can be seen in our esophagus and also in our small intestine. It's not going to be involved in like physical digestion or mechanical digestion. It's just pushing the food forward. So look here, you can see the food, which we have contraction here, and then relaxation here. So adjacent segments of the alimentary canal contract and relax. So we have contraction here, relaxation here. Then contraction and relaxation, contraction and relaxation. So this gonna push the food forward. But look here, we have another type of motility, segmentation, which this segmentation, it can push the food forward, but very slowly, but it's very important in mechanical digestion. Because as you can see, here we have the contraction, relaxation, and contraction. So we have contraction of non-adjacent segments and relaxation of non-adjacent segments. So here you can see this region, which it was contracted, now it's relaxed. And then this segment, which it was relaxed, now is contract. So this segmentation or this type of rhythmic local contraction, which gonna happen in our small intestine, it's gonna move the food forward and backward. So it's kind of mixing the food with the juices which we have in our small intestine, and also it's gonna help breaking down the food. So it's gonna be involved in mechanical digestion. It's the same mechanism when you throw up. No, that's not the same mechanism. It's gonna so throw up, it's gonna, because um your internal, so that's the throwing up, it has different reason. Okay, so one of the reason, your internal pressure inside of your abdomen should be increased, and also we have some like the sphincter, which they're gonna prevent the like food to go backward, so they're gonna be relaxed and they cannot work anymore. So then we have like pushing the food with very like very fast from our like lower part of the abdominal organ into the upper part of the abdominal organ into the oral cavity. That's a different mechanism, but this mechanism, they're gonna push the food forward into the lower abdominal part, not the upper part. Okay, and in this and in between we have some structures like a sphincter, which they're gonna prevent the food back to the like the organ which we had before. The peritoneum is the serous membrane, which is gonna cover the organs of the abdominal organ. We talked about the serous membrane before, right? You know, the serous membrane, which is gonna cover the lung, it's called pleura. The serous membrane covers the heart, it calls the pericardium, and peritoneum is the serous membrane which gonna cover the organs of abdominal pelvic cavity. Like other serous membrane, peritoneum has two layers, visceral peritoneum and parietal peritoneum. The visceral peritoneum is gonna cover the digestive organs directly, and peritoneal peritoneum is gonna line the abdominal wall. And between these two layers, there is a potential space, which we call this as peritoneal cavity. The folding of the peritoneum can make another structure, which we have the lesser omentum. The lesser omentum is a folding of the serous membrane or peritoneum, which it's going to be between the stomach and the liver. So we're going to study the stomach, and you're going to see that the stomach has the curvature, which we call this as lesser curvature. So here you can see the stomach. This is the lesser curvature of the stomach, and here we have the liver. You can see the lesser omentum is this folding of peritoneum between the stomach and liver. And then greater omentum is the other folding of peritoneum, which it connect to the stomach, and then like an apron, it goes down and then folding up and then attaches to the transverse colon. So here you can see the greater omentum, which they've just folding it up. So the greater omentum is kind of covers the intestine, the small intestine here. So then the greater omentum is another folding of peritoneum, which is gonna be between the stomach and transverse colon, and the stomach is the greater omentum is gonna be attached to the greater curvature of the stomach. Let me go back. Here you can see actually a portion of the greater omentum. So that is the greater curvature of the stomach, which the greater omentum is going to be attached to the greater curvature of the stomach, and like an apron, it goes down and then folding up, covering actually the small intestine, and then attaches to the transverse colon. Here you can see the sagittal section of the abdominal pelvic cavity, which I hope it can help you to understand the concept of the greater omentum. Look here, you can see the liver and then the stomach. Then here you have the section of the transverse colon, the small intestine. You can see here, this is a folding of peritoneum, attaches to the stomach and then goes down, covering the small intestine, and then folds up and then attaches to the transverse colon. That is the greater omentum from the sagittal section. And here you can see the lesser omentum between the stomach and liver. And then we have the mesentery, or the mesentery proper or mesentery, which the mesentery proper or mesentery, it's gonna cover the small intestine and then attaches the small intestine into the posterior wall of the abdomen. So here you can see the mesentery. It means if you want to take out the small intestine from the abdomen, you cannot, because they are attached to the posterior wall of the abdomen through the mesentery. Okay, 1 second, please. I have to do something. Okay, sorry. Now we're going to talk about the histology of the alimentary canal. So the alimentary canal, they are the hollow organs like our esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, they are hollow organs. So it means that if you cut them and look at their cross section, you can see a lumen and a valve. The lumen is like a cavity or space which food can go through it, and then that's the wall of the alimentary canal. At the wall of the alimentary canal, from the esophagus to anus, we can find 4 different layers. The innermost layer, which is gonna be toward the lumen, we call this as mucosa. The mucosa layer. And then under mucosa, there is submucosa layer. And under submucosa layer, there is the muscularis external layer. And then the outermost layer would be the adventitia or serosa layer. The mucosa layer, which is the innermost layer, is actually consists of 3 sublayers: the epithelium, the laminoproperia, and muscularis mucosa. The epithelium can be different in different parts of the alimentary canal. In esophagus, we have the stratified squamous epithelial tissue, which is thick because of the protection. But from stomach to the like rectum, there is simple columnar epithelial tissue. So the epithelium can be stratified squamous epithelial tissue in esophagus, or can be simple columnar epithelial tissue from stomach to the rectum. What is the laminoperitoneum? Laminoperitoneum is the areolar connective tissue which can be found beneath the epithelium. We call this tissue as laminoperitoneum. And the muscularis mucosa is the smooth muscle layer, is a very thin layer of smooth muscle which can divide or separate the mucosa from the submucosal layer. Then the submucosal layer, which I draw with the yellow color, is going to be a connective tissue below the mucosal layer, which it contains the blood capillaries, the lymphatic vessel, and also the nerve fibers. And then we have the muscularis externa, which is going to be external to the submucosal layer, and it has two layers of smooth muscle. The inner layer is circular because the direction of the fibers are circular, so we call this as inner circular layer. And the outer muscular layer is longitudinal. So in our esophagus, small intestine, large intestine wall, there are two layers of smooth muscle at their muscularis externa. Circularis, inner, and then longitudinal outer, except in our stomach. In our stomach, there are three layers of smooth muscle. And then the outermost layer can be serosa or adventitia. The serosal layer, you all know, is the peritoneum. So if our organs is stomach, is a small intestine, large intestine, the outermost layer would be serosal layer, the visceral peritoneum. But if our organ is esophagus, the outer layer, the outermost layer would be adventitia. What is the difference between adventitia and serosa? The serosa is the connective tissue plus epithelium, but adventitia is just the connective tissue. And also in this layer, we have two nerve plexus, meyenteric nerve plexus, which is going to be found between these two muscularis layer, between the inner and outer layer of the muscularis externa, and submucosal nerve plexus, which it's obvious is going to be found in the submucosal layer. Look at this picture. So you can find all of these four layers and then sub layers in this picture. So from inner, we have the mucosa, and then submucosa, muscularis externa, serosa, or adventitia. And then we divided the mucosa into the epithelium, this innermost layer. And then under epithelium, there is areolar connective tissue. We call this as laminoperitoneum. And this one thin layer of smooth muscle, which is going to be between the mucosa and submucosal layer, is the muscularis mucosa. After that, you can see another connective tissue layer, which there are the submucosal nerve plexus, blood vessel, lymphatic vessels. It's submucosa, and you can see two different layers of the smooth muscle, one circular and one longitudinal, which they're going to make our muscularis externa. And between these two layers, there is a nerve plexus, which we call this as meyenteric nerve plexus. And the outermost layer can be serosa, which is epithelium and connective tissue, or can be adventitia. Okay. This is a microscopic picture of the alimentary canal, which you can see the mucosa layer, the submucosa, muscularis externa, and then serosal layer. Okay, let's look at the mouth, because the mouth or oral cavity is the first organ of our alimentary canal. The mouth is going to be lined with the mucosal layer. composed of epithelium and laminoproperia. The epithelial tissue lining the mouth is a stratified squamous epithelium. Lips and cheeks, which they're gonna make the boundaries of the oral cavity. Lips is gonna be formed from the orbicularis oris muscle, and then cheek gonna be formed by buccinator muscle, which they are the skeletal muscle. So here you can see the oral cavity or mouth, which the tongue can make the floor of the oral cavity, and then palate, which is composed of hard palate and soft palate. It's gonna make the roof of the oral cavity. The anterior border of the oral cavity is lips, and the lateral border are the cheeks. There is a structure which we call this as labial frenulum. We have the superior and inferior labial frenulum, which gonna connect the lips to the gum. Okay, and we talked about this palate, which the hard palate is the anterior 2/3 of the palate or roof of the mouth, which is bony and composed of two bones. If you remember, the maxilla and palate bones gonna make our hard palate, and soft palate, which is muscular, and then the soft palate hanging down and make the uvula. Which uvula, this structure, which if you open your mouth in front of the mirror, you can see these like little thing hanging down. It's gonna be uvula, which during the swallowing, uvula gonna elevate and close off the nasopharynx and prevent the food goes from the oropharynx into the nasopharynx. Yes, here you can see the uvula, which is this the hanging part of the soft palate. Tongue, it's gonna make the floor of the oral cavity is a muscular organ. It's composed of the skeletal muscle in different directions. The tongue, it can help for speech, and also can help for our digestive function, because it can grips the food and also reposition it and mix it the food with the like saliva. So then also yes, the tongue, we can divide the muscle, the skeletal muscle related to our tongue, into the intrinsic muscle, which they are muscle, their origin and insertion gonna be inside of the tongue. We call them as intrinsic muscle. And then there are extrinsic muscle, which they're gonna originate from the external to the tongue, from the bones we have around the tongue, and then they're gonna be inserted to the tongue. Okay, if you look at the dorsal surface of the tongue, the dorsal surface of the tongue is the surface which gonna be toward the roof of the mouth. The dorsum, or the dorsal surface of the tongue, you can find some projections, which these projections, we call them as papillae. There are different type of papillae based on their structure, based on their shape, and also they can be different in their number as well. So we have filiform papillae, which is the most abundant papillae in our tongue, and then we have the fungiform papillae, which they are mushroom shape, and we have the valate papillae, which we have the about the 8 to 10 valate papillae, which is going to be found between the 2/3 and 1/3 of the anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3 of the tongue. So the filiform papillae are going to be found everywhere. There are the smallest one and the most abundant one. The fungiform papillae, they are mushroom shape, and at their structure we can find the taste buds, With taste buds are the structure which we can find the taste receptors, which they're gonna collect the information regarding the taste and then send it to the brain through the sensory nerve. And then valid papillae, which we can find here between the anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3 of the tongue, like a V shape. Also, we can find the taste buds at their structure as well. So if you look at the tongue under microscope, you can find that these papillae or tongue gonna be lined or covered by a stratified squamous epithelial tissue, and between those stratified squamous cells of the fungiform papillae and valid papillae, you can find the taste buds. Since we have the 20 deciduous teeth, which they are temporary and they're going to be replaced by permanent teeth, which there are 32 teeth. And then here you can see then we have the 2 incisors, 1 canine, and then 2 premolars, and then 3 premolars in the permanent teeth. The tooth structure, you can see we can divide our tooth into the exposed part of the tooth, which is called crown, and then the part of the tooth which is going to be into the socket of the bone, the maxilla bone and the mandible bone. We call this as root, and the neck is going to connect the crown to the root. The crown is going to be like covered by enamel, which is gonna be like in a lot of forces when we are chewing. It's gonna be very, very hard. It has very, very hard structure. And then below to the enamel, there is dentine, which dentine, it has a structure harder than the bone. And then into the roots, there is the pulp cavity, which in pulp cavity, it contains the blood vessels and nerves. And then the other surface of the root, there is the cementum, which is a calcified connective tissue. And you can see the periodontal ligament is a ligament which gonna connect the tooth to the bone, and it's gonna make the joint, which we talked about it before. Okay, then we are going to talk about the salivary gland, which is actually part of the accessory organs of digestive system. We have the parotid gland, which is the largest salivary gland. It's going to be found outside of the oral cavity, but it's going to send its duct into the oral cavity. So we can see the parotid gland, which is going to be found anterior and a little bit inferior to the ear. It's very large gland, going to be found anterior to the masseter muscle as well. And its duct, it's going to pierces the buccinator muscle and goes into the oral cavity. And below the tongue, there is sublingual gland. So the sublingual gland is another salivary gland. It's going to be found below the tongue. It has about 10 to 12 ducts, which the duct gonna release the saliva below the tongue. And then below the mandible, there is another salivary gland, which we call this as submandibular gland. So we have parotid gland, submandibular gland, and sublingual gland, which they're gonna produce the saliva, which saliva is composed of water and also the electrolytes and also the amylase enzyme. The amylase enzyme, which gonna break down the starch, the carbohydrates. So it means the breaking down of the food, the chemical digestion is going to start in our oral cavity, which actually we're going to start the carbohydrate digestion in our oral cavity. Okay, So we talked about the oral cavity, which is the first part of the alimentary canal. By the help of the tongue and teeth, we can do the mechanical digestion. And then we talked about the salivary glands going to be found around the oral cavity. So all of them, some are going to be, yes, inside of the oral cavity, and the parotid gland going to be outside of it, but all of them going to release their saliva into the oral cavity. So then the teeth going to chew the food, break down the food into the smaller pieces, and by the help of the tongue, the food going to be repositioned and then mix the food with the saliva. And then through the swallowing, we're gonna push the food into the pharynx, which we talked about the pharynx in respiratory system. The pharynx is a tube, starts from the base of the skull to the level of the C6, the cervical vertebrae number 6. So if we can divide the pharynx into the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. The nasopharynx is the portion of the respiratory system because the only air should gonna pass through the nasopharynx. But the oropharynx and laryngopharynx gonna be the organs of both respiratory and the digestive system, because through the oropharynx and laryngopharynx, both air and food can pass through them. And the oropharynx is gonna be lined with the stratified squamous epithelial tissue. And in the pharynx, at the wall of the pharynx, there are different type of skeletal muscle, which their contraction gonna help for swallowing. Esophagus is the another organ which after the laryngopharynx, food should go to the esophagus. The esophagus is a muscular tube which gonna be collapsed, but when the food gonna go through it, it's gonna be open. The esophagus, it does not gonna be involved in any like digestion or absorption or elimination. It's just a passageway for food from pharynx into the stomach. And so the esophagus, some part of the esophagus is going to be found in our neck. Most part of the esophagus is going to be found in our thorax, behind the heart, behind the trachea. And then a short part of the esophagus is going to be found in our abdominal cavity. So it should pass through the diaphragm. Okay, so it's going to pierce the diaphragm and then attaches to the stomach. If you look at the esophagus under a microscope, you can find those 4 layers: the mucosal layer, the submucosal layer, the muscularis externa, and then the adventitia, which is the most external layer. The epithelial tissue of the esophagus is a stratified squamous epithelium. And then the muscularis externa, in some part, it can have the skeletal muscle. So the first third of the length of the esophagus is a skeletal muscle, but the other parts has the smooth muscle. And then the outer layer is adventitia. It's not serosal layer, because the serosal layer is going to be found in our abdominal pelvic cavity, but the esophagus, most part of the esophagus is going to be found in our thoracic cavity. The stomach is the next organ, which is very important in digestion of the protein, because in our stomach, there are some cells which they're gonna produce the pepsin, which the pepsin is an enzyme which gonna digest the protein. And also in our stomach, there are some cells which they're gonna produce the acid. The stomach has the harshest environment in our alimentary canal. The pH of the stomach is around 2, because it's gonna prevent the growing of the bacteria or microorganism. And also the acid is going to help to activate the pepsin enzyme. So the pepsin is going to functions under acidic conditions. So without the acidic environment, the pepsinogen cannot convert to pepsin, which the pepsin is the active form of the pepsinogen. So please remember, in our stomach, there are 3 layers of smooth muscle, which these 3 layers of smooth muscle, which their contraction and relaxation, making some churning motility. With this churning motility is going to help for the mechanical digestion. So we have both type of digestion here. Mechanical digestion because of this churning activity or motility, and also chemical digestion because of the pepsin. So the partially digested food mixed with gastric juice is called chyme. So chyme is going to be produced, or it's going to be formed in our stomach, because in our stomach with churning motility, we're going to break down the food and also mix it with gastric juice. So here you can see the structure of the stomach. So we can divide it to the cardia. Cardia is the part which esophagus is going to be attached to the stomach. If you draw an imaginary line going to pass through the cardia, above this line going to be fundus, which the gas is going to be collected here. Most part of the stomach, it's going to be the body of the stomach, and the ending part is called the pyloric portion. You can see here this thickened circular layer of smooth muscle at the ending part of the stomach. It makes this sphincter. We call this as pyloric sphincter. Pyloric sphincter going to be found between the stomach and small intestine. The first part of the small intestine is called duodenum. So it's gonna control the motility of the chyme from stomach into the duodenum, and also it prevents the backflow of the chyme from duodenum into the stomach. And also you can see the stomach is J-shaped, so if we can define the greater curvature and also the lesser curvature. So as we talked about some folding before, the stomach gonna be covered by peritoneum, and then peritoneum gonna make some folding. One, it's going to be connected to the greater curvature and then goes down and then folds up, attaches to the transverse colon. We call this as greater omentum. And another folding of peritoneum, which going to be attaches to the lesser curvature between the stomach and liver. We call this as lesser omentum. At the stomach wall, again, we can define 4 layers: mucosal layer, the innermost, the submucosal layer, and then the muscularis external layer, and then the serosal layer. For muscularis external layer, please make sure you know there are 3 layers of smooth muscle. We have inner oblique, middle circular, and outer longitudinal. For the mucosal layer, you should know there is simple columnar epithelial tissue, which is going to line the stomach. Then some of this epithelial tissue is going to invaginate into the laminoproperia and make these gastric glands. So this is structure, you can see the invagination of the epithelium into the connective tissue under it or into the laminoproperia. It makes the gastric gland. The gastric gland, it's going to be composed of some cells. We have chief cell, parietal cell, the mucus cell, and also enteroendocrine cell. The chief cells are the cells going to produce pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is an inactive form of pepsin, is an inactive form of enzyme. Parietal cell is going to produce acid, which the acidic environment is going to help to destroy the bacteria, the microorganism, and also the presence of acid is important to convert pepsinogen to pepsin, because pepsin is the active form of the pepsinogen, which is going to break down the protein. The mucus cells, they're going to produce mucus, which is obvious, but what is the enteroendocrine cell? Do you remember we talked about the when we talked about the endocrine system? I told you that there are some cells in our digestive system, in our stomach, in our small intestine, which they're going to act like endocrine cells. They're going to produce some hormones and release them into the blood. So the enteroendocrine cells, they're going to produce hormone. The hormone is not going to be released into this duct. It's going to be released directly into the blood. So the gastric juice, which we can find into the lumen of the stomach, is composed of the acid, mucus, pepsin, but not hormones, because hormones are going to be released into the blood.